welcome tonight. It is Wednesday night, so you know what it means. It's another awesome episode of What the Fuck Paranormal Chat with the Naked Bigfoot. I am your humble host, Mike the Naked Bigfoot. And again, I want to extend my welcome. Thank you all for coming on the live tonight. Take a moment to thank everybody who is going to be watching the replay after this, because I know not everybody can make the live. Um, Although I would love everybody to make the live, because it's just so much more fun to have everybody here at the same time. But I appreciate you, and you'll be on when you can. A lot of people have been incredibly excited about tonight's episode. We've got some really interesting feedback about what we'll be talking about tonight. But before we get to that, as always, we start off every show. For those who are not familiar on how my show works, we start off every show um, with an opening. This show is not meant to persuade, dissuade, uh, alter your perceptions of the world in any way, or challenge your religious beliefs. What the fuck paranormal chat? I put that together to be both informative, educational, and entertaining. Foremost, entertaining. I want you to be entertained when you watch the show. For those who are not used to how I run a show, sometimes it's a little bit of consciousness. Like just now, I lose my thought. It goes right out my ass. um, oh, here. Well, I want to thank everybody who's just tuning in. We haven't started up in earnest yet. We're doing the prelims right now, so you haven't missed anything yet. I'm trying to keep it upbeat because this show is going to get very somber and very dark really fast tonight. So I warn you. Um, also, if there are any kids in the room with you while you're watching the show, uh, I want to let you know, for those who do not know already, I do use some bad language, curse words during the course of the show. I do not do it to shock people. I do not. It's just part of my vernacular, and it does happen to pop out of my mouth on occasion. So if you have any small children in the room who have not been exposed to naughty language, you do not wish for them to be exposed to naughty language, please ask them to leave the room now. If you do not care for such language, I do want you to stay and listen to the show. I want you to enjoy the show. But I will not apologize for the way I speak. It just happens. I do try really hard to refrain from dropping an F-bomb every other word. But sometimes I get caught up in the moment and it happens. But if you stick with me, I guarantee you a good time. Also, as you can see, I'm speeding through all the opening blather I normally do. I'm speeding through it. Oh, real quick. For those who have been watching my show from last week about shadow people, that show, I'm so proud of that show. But I want to thank everybody for watching it. I have never done a show to date that's gotten over 200 views. So it makes me feel good that I've done a show that people want to watch. And that's a subject that people are interested in. I did have fun doing the Shadow People episode because I think I brought some new perspectives to the Shadow People phenomenon. Yeah, I used the word phenomenon. So if you haven't watched it yet, I do encourage you to watch it. If you haven't watched the story about the time, I do encourage you to watch that one as well. So, but I am really, really happy that people have found the Shadow People episode show good enough to view it that many times, and that many people curious enough to view it and enjoy it. So that makes me smile. So I want to thank everybody for that. I do appreciate you very much. You all know I don't do the show for the clicks. I do the show because I enjoy doing the show. I like entertaining people, and I like connecting with people. And it looks like I connected with a lot of people. And that makes me smile. Alrighty. And finally, we do play a drinking game on my show for those who have never seen an episode of the show. Uh, the drinking game, of course, is no fun if you don't watch it live, but if you get a group of people and you watch it, the replay, um, you can all, as a group, play the drinking game. So, but if you're watching tonight or the replay and you do it as a group, we do play a drinking game. Every time you hear me say that's a story for another day, or that's a story for another time, or some iteration of a phrase, please take a drink and or sip and or shot of your adult beverage of choice. If you do not imbibe adult beverages but wish to play the drinking game anyway, then I encourage you to drink your non-alcoholic beverage of choice, whether it be tea, milk, water, so on and so forth, cola, you name it. For those who are drinking adult beverages tonight, I do not drink and drive. I repeat, do not drink and drive, because tonight's episode especially, probably going to be saying that phrase a lot, because it's going to touch the story that I'm going to tell you tonight is going to, it connects with so many other things that have happened in my life. It touches so many different things that have happened in my life, that it was a part of. This story was created many stories and many paths. This object especially, when we start talking about it. And tonight's episode will involve a lot of history. Well, not a lot of history, some history. We will be talking about slavery tonight as well, for those who may be triggered. I will be talking about it, as a matter of fact, historically factual as possible. So, especially about history of another country, slavery in another country that people may not be familiar with, I think you'll enjoy that part of it as well. It's very it's the center of tonight's tale is the history there. Alrighty, let's begin tonight's tale, the tale of the stone face. As you've all seen, I'm talking about a stone face. What do I call a stone face? Let me go right here with me, as a matter of fact. I've got it wrapped in a snake skin, by the way. I have to explain that to you in a second, because I want to show it to you. This is the stone face. Get a good look. Get a good look. I do want you to get a good look at it, because I'm going to be talking about different physical features of it a little bit later in the tale, so get a really good look at it. And I'll tell you what, looking through the eyes of this thing is creepy as fuck too, so just to give you the heads up. Okay. By the way, this is the snake skin I was telling you about. And you've heard me talk in the past. I do have a modest collection of haunted, supernaturally charged, dark objects in my collection of paraphernalia foci. And the snakes and the stone face is one of them. The snake skin is one as well, although the snake skin is not dark. The snake skin is a whole separate story. It's a story for another day. But this snake skin is Um, but long story short, and I should probably do an episode on that, how I got the snake skin, because you'll see in other shows. The snake skin is an object of protection. Uh, I received it actually from a snake, the actual snake. Uh, the snake, at the end, I had a very long end conversation with the snake. I shit you not. And at the end of the conversation, the snake shed its skin in front of me and crawled away. But before it crawled away, I asked it, "What is that for?" And it said only one word. It said protection. And then it crawled away and disappeared. Um, so again, that's just for another day. I'll have to do a show on the talking snake. um, Trust me, that's not as fun or as entertaining as it sounds. It's a scary ass story. um, that ended, which is rare for me, ended in a positive way. But the snake skin is a charged object. It's a charmed object. It holds negative energy, evil, harmful forces, harmful entities, harmful spirits. It actually holds them at bay if it's used to place around or near an object that snake skin is. And when I took this stone face um, out of its box, and it was inside of a mirror box, and I'll have to explain later what a mirror box is when we tell the story. And when I took it out of the mirror box, I took it out with the. I bet you do hear drums when you look at this mask, because it's never not. This thing is never not active. Trust me, it's super active right now. So I strongly advise anybody who's viewing this thing, just as a warning. Let me put the warning out there right now. Very few people have seen this thing. I've kept it locked up for, God, decades, ever since I first found it. And when it first started affecting me personally, and when I learned more about it, I realized this is something that I didn't want to release back into the world, and something I had to keep locked away, uh, and to keep safe from my family and everything else. It is a dangerous object, and let me give the disclaimer now. Some people think it's cool to collect haunted objects or charged objects or uh, possessed objects, objects that deal with the paranormal in any way. They think it's cool to have it in their house. They think it's so they can tell everybody, "Oh, look at my scary cursed skull on my shelf." When you are dealing with objects like this, I'm going to tell you the story of the stone face. You need to understand that we're not talking about things that are, create rains. These things are dangerous, depending on what they were created for or what's touching them. Um, these objects can cause a great deal of harm to you spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally. They can really wreak damage on you. Yeah, you can see me. I'm going into the serious mode now. They can really, really hurt you. Um, you don't take objects like this lightly. You don't collect objects like this with the purpose of exploiting them. You have to treat these objects like a venomous snake. Um, when you're around them, you always have to be careful around them. But you never know when it's going to reach out and bite you. So, if you run across an object like that and you wish to keep it as a part of your collection, you need to do your research on it. And you need to learn how it can affect you or affect your family or affect your friends, um, and learn how to contain it, how to render it in a neutral standby state to where it isn't interacting with the world around you and around it. I can't emphasize that enough. Things like this, I might be talking about it tonight, and that's why I wrote. If anybody's on Twitter and read my tweet, I did a tweet before I went on tonight that I wasn't sure that I wanted to share more of the things in my collection and tell the stories behind them, because it might encourage people to go out and try to create a collection of shit like this. Um, some of the stuff in my collection I collected because it was cool. I picked it up because it was cool. Some of it I got and um, removed it from doing harm to people, and that it was doing things to people, and I removed it from them and to help them, and I learned how to contain it and how to deal with it. So yeah, I did stupid shit when I was first collecting some of this stuff, and actually the stone face is one of the things I did something stupid with, and I regret it. I regret it to this day that I regret that I ever picked this damn thing up. Um, but what is done is done and cannot be undone. What is said, be said. What does that mean? um, this thing, I don't feel safe releasing it back into the wild to do harm to anybody else, any unsuspecting person that's dealing with it. Okay, I know. I've been vague enough tonight. Let's talk about it. Okay, our story begins. Well, my story begins. How did I find the stone face? By the way, I'm just not calling it the stone face, as you'll find out really soon. I don't call it the stone face for a dramatic effect. That is actually the proper name of this particular object, because these objects are created, um, and they're, you know, the method of creating them is called stone facing. When you create a stone face. Yeah, you guys are. It's super. It's ecstatic to be out of its box. But I got the old talking snake skin. I know that sounds silly, but again, I'll probably tell the story about how I got that snake skin later on another show. Okay, everybody knows. For those who don't know, I am a Hungan. I'm a voodoo priest. I studied and was of the decades ago, as everybody may or may not know, who knows of me and has seen my stories of the past. What a lot of people have only heard me talk about briefly, and mention on occasion, is the time that I went back to Haiti after becoming a Hungan. I traveled back to Haiti, uh, mainly to try to find members of my teacher, Papa Thomas, and to find, some of his relatives to work with, and some of his distant relatives to work with, to see who was left alive. And after he died, I was when I one of the times I went back to Haiti. Um, Quick history about Haiti, and I was staying with I wasn't st- I was staying outside of Port-au-Prince. For those who've never been to Haiti, um, or have been to Haiti but stayed in the what is can be considered a resort type area, and which is really not a resort type area. If you ever go there, it's you'll never forget your trip. If you ever go there to Haiti, you'll never forget that trip. Trust me, you'll never forget it. And seeing the things around you, the state of that country, and the state of the people there, and what they have to live in and live through. You'll never forget it. It'll touch you. It'll touch you permanently. Touch you in your life. In Haiti, 99% of the people who do not live in the city, who live outside the city. Now, outside the city, there's a number of 10 and tar paper shacks that are uh, put together outside the city that people live in the best they can. And then as you go further away from the city and that, you start running across uh, house places that are put together a little bit better. Um, Building materials on the island or on that part of the of in Haiti are hard to come by. What you can find is terribly expensive. And Haiti, as most people may or may not know, they are prone to earthquakes, and usually any structure anybody builds there, if it's not built to any kind of to withstand any earthquake standards, it will collapse. Some part of it will collapse, and usually it kills people when it collapses. And afterwards, when the people have to rebuild their homes, um, they rebuild it from the intact pieces of whatever collapsed from the house. They try to rebuild it from the intact pieces that are around it. But if they do not have enough materials, and they can't afford to get the materials, and materials aren't available to them, which it usually isn't, um, they usually have to go and scavenge them. Now, for those who do not know, now we're going to talk about a little bit of history here for those who don't know. Um, Prior to our Civil War, Haiti was Hispaniola. Haiti was the center of the slave trade, of slaves coming into the Americas. They would usually come to the Caribbean and through Haiti. Massive slave populations, both in the sugarcane that worked the sugarcane fields there. Uh, uh, they also manufactured different charcoal, different cut down wood for lumber, and shipped it back over to the United States or overseas to Europe. Huge, huge slave population, of course, African slave population. Uh, they were plenty of on the island. There were plenty of plantation houses. There were the well-to-do non-black. I say non-black because there were different races that were involved in the slave trade. There were I wouldn't say the French were a separate race, although don't get me started with French. Story for another time. But you had uh, you had people from Spain who were slave traders who and were also plantation owners uh, in Haiti at the time. Um, so there were a number of homes, slave owner homes, or slave plantations that were there. Now, during the Great Revolt, they had the Great Revolt where the religion, the faith of voodoo, emigrated. It was the Great Emigration. It emigrated from, along with a lot of the people, a lot of the freed slaves that freed themselves. They emigrated to the Gulf of here, the Gulf, what we call the Gulf of Mexico now, the Gulf states, including Louisiana, Georgia, parts of Florida, Mississippi, and they brought their faith and their customs with them when they came over. Uh, but during that Great Revolt, a lot of these old plantation homes were um, abandoned by the plantation owners who thought it was either too unsafe or it wasn't going to make them any money in the future to stay there. So they packed up their shit, left, either came to the United States or they went back to their country of origin. And they left these homes, these estates there, including the slave quarters and the main house and so on and so forth. Um, well, when a lot of the foundations to these homes, a lot of people don't talk about this. The Haitian slave trade, they don't talk about it. It has a much more terrible history than what we have here in the United States. Much more terrible. But skip ahead to modern times, when you would have homeowners who had to scavenge building materials. We're talking about stones, foundation stones, and so forth, pieces of lumber, pieces of tin, uh, anything that could be fashioned into a shelter or be attached to their home to help shore it up after an earthquake. They went to some of these old plantation sites on the island, and they would take as much material as they could to go and add to their home, uh, to shore it up after an earthquake. Now, unbeknownst to me at that time, because I went with the family that I was staying with in Haiti. Um, I went out with them one day. We were going on a scavenging mission to go to some of these old home places and abandoned homes, recently abandoned homes, as well as some of the old plantation homes that had been abandoned. We were looking, we took our carts with us. We were looking for foundation rock. We were looking for brick, large stone, anything that we could help build into walls or to cover holes or fill in holes into the foundation or the walls of the house that we were trying to work on. And unbeknownst to me, there are some properties that the Haitian people will not go to. They are properties that have been touched by something dark, something evil, something bad, something negative, something evil. I don't use the evil word very often, the big E word. I'm talking about capital E for evil, not lowercase a. I'm talking about evil as something, as an entity. Evil. They avoid these places because of things that have happened there, um, and that this energy and this evil still persists there. Usually, locations in Haiti that are like that, well, they will not go near, or like some of the old slave cemeteries that are there. They were outside of some of the old plantation homes. They will not go to the old slave cemeteries at all. They won't step foot in them. Uh, there's so much darkness and so much anguish and sorrow that emanates from that place that it would gobble, spiritually, it would gobble you up. It would destroy you. It would destroy you if you spent too much time in these places. And remember, this is not superstition to the Haitian people. This is not superstition. Um, this is their life. This is what they believe in. It is not a something. It's not some folk tale. It's not. They don't take it lightly. This is their faith. They live and breathe their faith, and this is part of their faith. Um, this is not something superstition that can be brushed off lightly whatsoever. Well, hell's bells. I didn't know all of the different places they considered taboo on the island. Um, so naturally, they let me wander off, and it was as I was going to, taking some of the trails into the woods. Actually, I had seen at one point on a jeep ride, I had seen the one of the old plantation homes that was still nearly intact during the jeep ride when I was going towards Port-au-Prince, coming out of the Dominican Republic. By the way, the Haitians in the Dominican Republic, Haiti and Dominic, the people from Haiti and people from the Dominican Republic, they don't get along, to put that lightly. Um, but it was easier for me to take a plane into Limon, outside of Limon in the Dominican Republic, and take a jeep over the mountains and go over to Port. Um, after having to pay off a number of some of the Dominican police from the checkpoints, the mountains paid them off as we go over. But as we were coming in, I had noticed this packed old plantation house that we had passed, and I thought, hey, I knew that there was probably some good things I could, some stone, some masonry stuff that I could collect there at that house and bring back to help them rebuild parts of their house there. So we split up, and I went, and unbeknownst to me, this was one of those areas that was taboo. This is one of those areas you did not want to go near. I did not know that at the time. Plus, I did not explain to the people I was staying with where I was going either. I went to this home. If it wasn't overgrown and by the jungle, moved into it. Uh, all the walkways leading up. It must have been quite beautiful back in its heyday. But as I approached it, started walking down the path up to it, um, I noticed that it wasn't as intact as I thought it was. That um, it had suffered some fire damage, mainly to part of the roof that had collapsed on it, that had burned up and collapsed in it. I walked in. As I walked over, I saw the doors had been off their hinges. Um, you could still see scorch marks on the masonry, so on and so forth. Uh, lower and the south wall had collapsed in on itself, but the chimney was still there. The fireplace was still there. Now, for those who do not know, um, and this is true at the time for that as well, plantation homes had fires that burned 365 days out of the year. They kept a fire burning at either one of the fireplaces or in the kitchen area. That fire burning all the fire never went out. Fire was just one of those important things that must always be all the time. So there was always somebody there to add fuel to that fire and to keep it burning. Again, whether it be winter, summer, spring, fall, that fire was always lit and ready to go. And I saw the chimney had collapsed in a little bit on itself. And I saw a bunch of the very large local rocks it had used to build the fireplace with. I said, "Damn, some of those would be good to help, rebuild the home." So I went over to the fireplace and I started picking through the rocks there. When I went in there, I had the suspicion something was watching me there. Um, to the point to where I kept looking over my shoulder and around. It felt like I was being watched. I was there. I did not feel like I was alone. I got the shivers. I got the shivers the entire time I was there. But I didn't let that, dissuade me from my holy mission. I was there to collect building materials. So I went over to the fireplace. And the fireplace was huge. It was a walk-in fireplace. It must have been absolutely gorgeous during its heyday. Um, Looking through the stones, back stones, looking for anything I could place on a cart and take back with me that we could use that were flat enough or rounded enough that would help build up a wall or a foundation with it. And towards what had been the back and center of the fireplace, I lifted up a large stone. And what did I find? The stone and some other debris. I reached down and I picked it up because I thought, damn, I've never seen something like this before. I picked it up, and then suddenly, when I picked it up, I got goosebumps across my entire body. I'm getting goosebumps now thinking about it. And I heard the twigs, something stepping on some twigs, cracking underfoot towards the area of the collapsed wall that led out into the jungle, and my head snapped up, and I saw at the edge of the jungle a young Asian man with he was wearing, it probably was a white shirt at one point, but it was a complete button-up shirt, short sleeves, but it was ragged. Um, It had bloody. He looked like somebody took a hand that was covered in blood, and wiped itself off on the front of his shirt, and he was wearing white cut-off pants and no shoes. And I was holding the stone face at the time when I saw him at the edge of at the edge of the jungle, and he was just looking at me, but his eyes were snow white, absolutely white. No other color but white when he was looking at me. They weren't glowing, um, but they were. It looked like wow. It looked like I was looking down into snow, to ice. Um, just pure white snow where his eyes should have been at. Black, ashen. It looked, and he smiled, and he smiled, and he pointed his arm, his finger at me. I thought it was pointing right at me, but I realized later that he was pointing at this that I was holding in my hand. I blinked, and he was gone, like he was never there. Um, this was the middle of the summer in a Haitian jungle, um, in the middle of the day as well, and it should have been completely. I should have been, basting in my own juices. But after that apparition appeared in front of me and disappeared, it had gotten very cold. The stone face felt like it felt like a piece of ice, like I was squeezing a piece of ice in my hand. But for some reason, I didn't want to sit it down. I just mechanically took it. I didn't think about it. I just took it with me. I sat it on the pile of stones I'd collected, and I decided to take it back with me. Met back with my family, wondered where I disappeared to. They were worried about me. Uh, people, uh, usually, it's usually bad. When somebody goes to the Haitian jungle, you don't see that again, ever again. You may find pieces of them later on, but you never find them again alive and intact, alive again. I didn't. Normally, whenever I found something weird when I would be visiting them, I would bring it to their attention and ask them questions. But I didn't feel like I wanted to tell them about this. I didn't want to talk to them about this. I took it and stuck it in my backpack at the house where I was sleeping at. Stuck it in my backpack. I didn't say a word about it when I found it. That night, backpack behind my head, um, I had a dream. I dreamt that I was standing outside of a beautiful white um, stone house, surrounded by, the most beautiful flowers and trees. And then suddenly I heard screaming, and the house burst into flames in front of me. And there were people trying to get out the windows. They were on fire. Their bodies were burning. They were trying to get out the windows. They were trying to beat their way out the doors, but couldn't do it. When they did come out, they were on fire. I could smell burning flesh, burning hair. I could hear the screams like I was standing right beside them when it was going on. And I snapped awake. I did. Um, I could still smell smoke. And I sniffed my arms and my clothes. And my clothes smelled like I had been near a fire, that they were covered in smoke. that had been exposed to smoke. Um, and one of the members of the family that I was staying with, they came in to check on me, walked over to check on me, and they said, "Have you been smoking?" I said, "No." They said, "Oh, did did you get too close to any of the campfires or anything out there, or any of the any of the community burnings? Because, dude, you smell like smoke." I said, "No." And they just looked at me really hard, like, we know there's something going on, but we just can't quite put our finger on it yet. Um, I will say I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, just sitting up, staring into the darkness. I only had 2 more nights there on the island before I had to head back up to the States. And for the next 2 days I spent with them, I'd go to Port-au-Prince with them, and we'd go to the market, you know, buy drugs, medicines. We would go to attend meetings of the faith, uh, buy groceries, so on and so forth. But I always felt like something was following me. Someone was following me and watching me, which is not unusual if you ever spend any time in Port-au-Prince in Haiti. Sometimes you do pick up people. They're usually robbers or killers that are following you. But in this case, when I would turn around and look, when we were in some of the crowded marketplaces, and I would turn around and look, I would see that young Haitian man that I'd seen at the edge of the jungle the day that I found that face, and the day I was in the middle of that old plantation house. I could see him in the distance, always looking at me and smiling at me the entire time. Um, I didn't think anything of it. I never thought anything of it. He was always creepy, but he always would be smiling when he looked at me. And then when I would blink or turn around and turn back to see if he was still there, he would be gone. Um, well, last day I was there before I left, I picked up my bag. It still had the face in it. When I picked it up, apparently the zipper was zipped where I had it at on there, and it fell out of my pack onto the ground. And apparently I unleashed hell because everybody stopped and went, "Where did you get that?" Um, I said, "What, this?" And I picked it up, and they smacked it back out of my hand again, back out of my hand and hit the ground again. And they said, "Stop touching it. Where did you find that at?" And I told them the story, how I went to that house. They said, "You should have never gone there." I said, "Why?" They said, "That belonged there. That's the reason why that house is there. It's the faith that you have there." And they sat me down and they told me the story of that plantation. Um, it was a Dutch family that owned that house. Particularly cruel man that owned that house. He was not cruel to his family. He had 4 daughters and a very young son, and a young wife too. He was an older man. He was very cruel to his slaves, to his Haitian slaves there. He would not permit them to practice any of their faith while they were there. And that was the ticker, because most plantations in Haiti, to be able to keep the slaves relatively happy and in a non-revolting mood, would allow them to practice their faith in their homes to keep them happy, or publicly, or gather in large groups and practice their faith. But this man would not let that happen at all. If he would go to the homes, and if anybody was caught practicing their faith, um, he would hang them. He would hang them, um, and he would not allow the families, the relatives of the hanged slave, to take the bodies and to bury them. He would take them to a pit that he made them dig, and he would burn the bodies in this pit. He would continue. He would just keep piling the bodies in and burning them, and make their family members do it. Take the bodies off the tree over there and burn those bodies in that pit. Um, it just wasn't fake. It would take very little to set him off. He not only hung his slaves, but he was also prone to beating them to death as well. Um, he would drag them behind his horses for the slightest thing. If they looked at one member of his family or one of his daughters sideways, um, he would have their eyes removed before he dragged them behind the horse and dragged them to their death, and then would burn their remains in this pit. This went on, um, from what they said, close to 2 decades went on, where, literally, you know, hundreds of slaves died there on his plantation, hundreds of them. He ruled by absolute fear on there. They had no other place to go. There was no, I mean, it's an island, for God's sakes. They had no other place to run to. They couldn't be found, um, whatsoever. So they were there. But a young man there on the plantation, um, he did the ultimate in the faith and the customs of voodoo, and the workings of voodoo. There are certain things, certain rituals that can be done, um, to enact vengeance on someone. But, and when I say vengeance, I mean death, to bring a very vicious and brutal death to someone, without laying hands upon them. They're not part of the forbidden texts in the faith, but there's an understanding that these practices, these rituals that one did, calling upon, all the hatred, all the pain, and all the rage uh, they could create a spirit. It's going to sound very Ghost Riderish. When I first heard this is what I thought. It would be a spirit of pure anger and rage, and uh, that it would work its will and bring the. Well, to be able to bring an entity like this into being, you would have to create a stone face. You would have to create a vessel from which, think of it as a genie bottle, someplace where the spirit could dwell, that you created. Now, the spirit that was created is something that did not exist in the world. You are creating something that never existed, ever. But it's a culmination of, again, pain, rage, vengeance, desire, blood. But the person who would craft this vessel, this stone face, um, they would pay the ultimate price for this vengeance. They would, to birth this spirit, this entity into existence, they would have to die. Um, and they would have to die, bloody, to bring it into existence. With their death would bring the birth of this spirit, of this entity. Um, God, hold on, let me wrap this thing up for a minute, because my leg's getting cold that it's sitting on. Let me wrap this thing up in the talking snake skin. If you can't hear me moving the snake skin over here. Um, it's getting big, really cold. Okay. And I feel better now with it sitting there on the snake skin to contain it. With your death, it would bring up the birth of this entity, this spirit, this thing of vengeance. It cannot be dissipated, it cannot be gotten rid of. Once you birth it into the world, it is here to stay. It is here to enact the will of its creator once it's here. The young man in question, he slit his own throat with a piece of metal that he had, ran it across his throat and killed himself. And his blood spilt out across the face when he died, the stone face that he had crafted um, from local clay. And he fired it in their community stove. He fired it to make it hard in their community stove, in the ashes of that stove, to make it happen. Supposedly, he had gone to the pit where all these slaves had been killed and burned in, and he had collected some of their remains and ground them into powder that he worked into the clay as well, because he felt it was proper to get vengeance for them as well as himself. He worked their remains into the clay itself when he was forming the face from the clay. And again, he hardened it. He like a kiln in the coals of their fire in the hovel in which they lived in. I probably shouldn't have taken this thing out. And if you look close enough too, which I've always found fascinating, I'll tell you about it, but if you look under the eyes, it looks like the eyes had been crying, like they'd been weeping as well. Because I swear to God, I've seen this thing cry before. Scares the ever shit out of me when it does stuff like that. The young man who created this and sacrificed himself to bring the spirit into being, his sister, his only surviving sister, because other members of his family had been killed by their master, the plantation master. She was one of the house slaves. She would go into the house every morning and clean, and dress the kids, and prepare the house for the day, and do the chores, do the cooking, do the cleaning, all the above. She brought the face into the home, and as the legend goes, took the face and put it in the main hearth of the house. Remember, as I said earlier, there's always, in these old homes, there was always a fire burning. That was the center activity in the house, the heart of the house. Thus, that's why it was called a hearth. It was the center of the house, the center of the life of the house. And she placed the stone face within that hearth, the ashes of the hearth in the very back of it there. And over the course of the next 7 days, each of the master's children died from some unknown illness. They died in agony. They died screaming in their beds. They couldn't explain the fevers they were experiencing. The kids, as they died, they were hallucinating. They would see winged demonic spirits flying about their face at night, and they literally died screaming. The last thing they did before they died was scream in absolute abject terror. He buried all of his children. They were all dead. Next was his wife, pregnant by him again. And we would call it nowadays, the baby was a stone baby. It was a baby that died inside condition. If you ever look it up, it's called stone baby, where the baby is never passed through the birth canal and can literally harden and calcify inside of a woman's body. Well, this happened to her when she became pregnant. This happened over the course of 15 days. She had the baby. It was beginning to mature within her. Then it died, and it calcified. It became a stone baby within 15 days. And she died from an infection from it. A horrible death that she had from it. And he buried her until there was just him that was left. He claimed, because by this time he had gone mad. He had literally gone out And he blamed the slaves. He blamed his slaves for what was happening to his household. His horses were beginning to die, but how they died was rather interesting. Um, it was as if some great predator was coming in and chewing out the eyes, the tongue, and the belly of his horses. He would find them, and those would be the pieces missing, as if something just would chewing them up on the inside, and they would collapse there. The thing was, he never found any blood. They never found any blood of whatever predator was feeding on his horses. They never found any tracks. They never found any blood in the stables from these animals, how they were being chewed alive in there. He would just go in and find them dead. He blamed the slaves, of course, and he ramped up his efforts to kill them and to punish them. But he didn't bother to take their bodies, have their bodies taken to the pit and burned. He would leave their bodies strewn about the plantation. Um, most of the slaves realized that he was under a curse. He was under, you know, something was happening to him that was otherworldly. And some of them fled into the jungle. And they headed to what is now known as the Dominican Republic. They fled across the mountains, except for the older and younger ones who could not endure the trip into the jungle and across and live in the mountains, or live on the other side of the mountains. And they were in their mercies. Before he died, and he died quite stark raving mad. He went through a terror of the house. He was with a torch setting parts of the house on fire. And some of the slaves who still gave slightly a crap about what was going on, even after all those horrible things that were happening there, they didn't want the fire to spread into the jungle and spread around the plantation and cause more death and misery for the people around there, so they would try to put the fire out. Uh, the master, they would go upstairs, after they put as many of the fires out as they could. They went upstairs and they heard he'd locked himself in the main bedroom. And they heard him screaming at someone. He was repeating over and over again, "I knew it was you. I knew it was you. I knew it was you, you bastard." And then they saw some smoke coming out from underneath the door, and they knew that there was a fire in the master's bedroom, and he was still in there screaming to the top of his lungs, "I knew it was you." And they beat the door down to go in, to try to do the humane thing, the human thing, and try to save him. But when they beat the door in, they looked, and within the swirling smoke, they saw the young Haitian boy, who had slit his own throat to create this stone face, this spiritual objects. They saw the spirit made of smoke that looked just like him. But it had arms stretched out, and it was looking with these burning white eyes at the old master, who by that time was engulfed in flames and was burned to death right then and there, but still screaming his fool head off at the spirit that was there. They realized that wasn't the spirit of the boy, but the spirit that the boy had made, because it was laughing, it was cackling in glee, watching the old master die. So they fled from the burning plantation house to never go back to it again, the few slaves that remained, and were able to pass that story along. Like I said before, these things that are created, once you create it, you cannot get rid of it. It is permanent in this world. When you create a spirit like this, I'm not saying it's indiscriminate about what it does, but it does find a great deal of joy out of giving pain, and grief, to the world around it. Um, they told me to take the stone face back to the plantation and leave it where I had found it at. Because if, you know, that spirit was still a part of the stone face, it still dwelt within that face, and that it would bring great harm to me if I held on to it. Not because I did something wrong, it's because it's what existence called for it to do. It was meant to cause pain. It was meant to exact vengeance on people. Um, it knew no other. It was created to do nothing else but that. And they said that eventually um, it would try to hurt me. And it would probably lead to my death if I held on to it for too long. And they said, get rid of it, get rid of it, get rid of it. Take it back to the house and put it back where you found it at. And I told them I would do it on my way back over the mountains. I would stop by the plantation and I would do that. I would leave it there in the ruins of the plantation. But I never did. Once I left the family and promised them that I would do that, I did do it. Instead, I put it back in my backpack and I took it back home with me. I will tell you this, it was very interesting trying to, when customs pulled it out of my bag and looked at it, um, usually they'll have a million questions about something like that when they find it, especially if it's something that looks like an antique like this. They'll have 1,000 questions about it. But they just looked at it and very mechanically put it back inside of my backpack and handed it back to me without saying a word to me about it. I found that odd. Um, but the question is, has it done anything to me inside the deck? Yes, it has done things. Spirit that dwells within it has done things. Um, one of the first homes that I had uh, was in a place called here in Virginia. It was a home I had in Arvonia, near what used to be Willis Mountain before they tore the mountain down. The home I was, it was a large apartment that I was in. And I put this up on my mantle, in my sitting room in my apartment. I say it's a house, but it was it was a house that was divided up, one apartment on each side of the house. It was a huge house that was divided up, and I had one half of the house. And it was on the mantle above the fireplace because I had a good fireplace on my side of that house that I was staying in. And I forget where I was working at the time. It was at one of the medical centers around Arvonia. I can't remember which one it was. And I worked the desk at the medical center, checking patients in and out. And I had all but forgotten the story that was told to me about the stone face, and forgotten about the vision of the Haitian man slash young man slash boy that I had until I saw him through the doors beside the desk looking out. He was reflected. It was a reflection of him. He was wearing a bloody shirt, bloody white shirt, the cut off white pants, the white eyes. And I saw his reflection in the glass in the door. Again, with the biggest smile. And when I saw him, all those memories came back to me, like all that had just happened. It had been years since I'd brought the face back with me, and nothing had happened up to that point. And I saw him, again reflected in the glass. I tried to shake it off. I got through the day after seeing that. And as I was driving home, Um, I saw reflected in my rearview mirror this young man again appearing the same way, bloody shirt. He was in my rearview mirror, sitting in my back seat of my truck, and I it startled me to the point where it was a single lane highway, two-way traffic, single highway that I had pulled over into the other lane, drifted into the other lane, and there was a very large logging truck that I barely missed hitting head on when I saw that. I managed to steering wheel back over and go off road on the other side and hit the ditch. And and I remember very distinctly when that happened because I was laying there trying to catch my breath. I was scared shitless in car in the ditch, almost went head on with a logging truck. I heard someone laugh very quietly. Someone laughing. Somebody sitting in the back seat of my car laughing very quietly behind me. Um, that scared me even more. So I went home. I got home without any further incidents. Scared shitless. Absolutely scared. Didn't think about the stone face, mind you. It was in my mental. Didn't think about um, putting it yet, putting it together yet. Um, I was fond of lighting candles at night and having around and different spots of the house. They were always soothing to me. They helped calm me down. And plus, I liked the glow of candles. Just thought it was really cool. And they were beeswax candles, scented beeswax candles. I remember at the time. I mean, one of them was strawberry. I remember the smell of strawberries thinking about. I was reading. Remember what I was reading too? I was reading King's It. I was reading Stephen King's It at the time when this happened. It was about 11 o'clock at night. I hadn't gone to bed yet. I was still reading. I was reading by candlelight. I thought that was cool. And I smelled smoke. Very strong smoke. And I got up all out of my chair and I turned around. And somehow the beeswax candle I had behind me on a table had found their way over on the windowsill beneath the curtains and had caught the curtains on fire. They had somehow been taken off of that table and put under the windowsill with the curtains, and the curtains were on fire, and the fire, and and I shit you not, the fire um, had all the curtains in that room on fire around me, flames that all in the windows. And I went nuts trying to. Um, the man who had the apartment beside me ran over there because every smoke alarm, was going off in my apartment, trying to put ran over, came door, came in, and helped me put out as much of the flames as we could. Um, Lot of smoke and fire. I burned the ever living hell out of my hands trying to beat the flames out. Second degree burns on my arms and hands later on after I went to the hospital to find out about it. And he asked me how the hell did that happen. I explained to him I don't know how these candles got to these windows. As I was trying to explain that to him, I hadn't noticed the pain in my hands and arms yet, where I'd burned the ever living hell out of myself. But over his shoulder and one of the windows where the curtains had burned off around them and the wallpaper, I saw reflected that Haitian again in the window. His white eyes and a grin looking back at me through these windows. And I realized he was couldn't tell if he was standing outside the window or if he was the reflection in the glass, smiling at me the entire time. And I started screaming. Not in pain, but it, it was scaring the hell out of me. I knew something was going on at that point. He had never called 911. The other guy, my neighbor, had ever called 911. And he thought I was screaming because I was in pain, and I was trying to point with my I was trying to point to what I was looking at behind me, and he managed to come under control and sitting back on the couch as the rescue squad came in, and they ended up taking me. I was going to refuse treatment because I was hysterical. I was nuts. I was out of my mind. They took me to the hospital. They kept me there overnight. Made sure I wasn't suffering from smoke and making treated my burns, my arms and hands to make sure no infection would set in. Back then, they could prescribe codeine. Let me tell you something about codeine. Codeine is fucking amazing. Codeine would take the pain away for 12 hours at a time. Um, they came in to check on me that morning. I was going to discharge from the hospital. Came in to check on me to make sure I was okay and I could get home okay. And he asked me something very peculiar. He said, "Did you have any friends with you overnight? Was anybody staying with you that night?" I said, "No, I was by myself that night." He said, "There was a young black man standing in front of the man stone face was on." He says, "I swear when I walked by and looked through the window, I saw him standing in front of that mantle looking through the glass at me. Didn't see me at first. He said when I got closer to the window, he turned around. He said for the life of me, he looked like he had white eyes." Um, and that's when I began to remember in my codeine fueled memory. I start to remember my experience in Haiti at the time. I start to remember that face, that stone face, sitting like a curiosity, because I have tons of objects on my mantle. Bones, fossils, small pieces of artwork I kept on the mantle that I found interesting. And that stone face was one of the things that were on the mantle at the time. I remembered the stories that they told me of the origins of the face. And I said, "What was that stone face? That is the spirit of that stone face." Um, Once I got out of hospital and got my shit together, before I went back to the apartment, um, I managed to get back in contact uh, with some of the faithful back in New Orleans. So my old voodoo contacts in New Orleans, and I asked them for and a couple of hoodoo workers too, and I asked them, what's the best way to deal with this, and they explained to me how to contain the spirit of the box I need to construct to contain it with. And if I ever did had to handle it, but to handle it for very short periods of time, but never leave it out to where its eyes can see you, to where these hollow eyes can see you and see your world. Because whatever the stone face could see, it could interact with. Um, and they told me how to construct a mirror box. My box is exactly the way it sounds. It's a box, but instead of having, the reflective part of the mirror on the outside of the box, all parts of the mirror faced inward. So when you place the object in there with it, and you would place it on a bed of grave soil, fresh grave soil, mixed with rue, dried rue in it, um, to keep it calm. But the only thing that it would be able to see inside of the mirror box would be itself. It would not be able to see anything to interact with it. So it would contain the spirit, that spirit that was created and dwelling within the stone face. Their mirror box kept it from seeing the world and seeing me interacting with it. Um, Once I put the box together and, of course, made the bed inside of it of soil and rue, I went back in. Um, I was shaking like a leaf off the damn man. Something inside my head kept saying, "Are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to do that?" And the entire time that I was putting it in the box, that thought was going over and over in my head. But it ended as I closed the lid on the box. That was the first time I ever dealt with anything that was that this dangerous before. Object that was this dangerous before. I told the story, of course, to my family, my kids, and everything, so they would never. They know they're parts of my workroom. There's a lot of boxes on my workroom and cabinets, so they know they are open to. Because the stuff outside there is. Um, this is one of the objects that sits on the highest part of those shelves out of reach of people, and in this glass mirror box I created for it. Um, for those who don't know, this it's real. These boxes, they're objects like this, objects that are created, that create spirits like this. They are real. This is stuff to play with. This is stuff you don't take lightly. I took it lightly and it almost killed me. I treated it. I'm not sure if it was because I was being influenced by Stoneface to maybe not see it as dangerous and keep it out in the open to where it can see my world and interact with my world. I'm not sure if it was fogging that or if it was just me being stupid. But I'll tell you what, it took a bunch of secondary burns um, for me to realize and not be stupid anymore. To realize that to never be stupid anymore and to never, ever to take something like this lightly anymore. This is one of many things that I keep sealed from the world and to keep safe from the world. Now, when I'm done tonight, I will be removing the skin from around the stone face, and I'll be placing it back in the mirror box before it can begin to do any harm to me and my family here in the house that I dwell in right now. But like I said, there's so many things that I have, and there's so many things out there that I have seen that I beg you, if you ever come across a box like this, don't make them part of your life. If you do bring them into your life, bring them into your life to control them, to render them neutral, to where they can't hurt the world, hurt you, more importantly, and those that you love. Objects like this are both beautiful, fascinating, and terrible at the same time. So I want you to take this as a cautionary tale as I sign off tonight. Conclude the tale of the stone face. Be careful, be cautious. Treat things like this like they can kill you. take it from me, they can kill you. Have a great night, everyone. I'll see you next time on What the Fuck Paranormal Chat with the Naked Bigfoot. I am your host, Mike, wishing you all pleasant dreams.